actively reproduces paternalistic and oppressive practices. Furthermore, there has been, over the past few years, an increasing number of immigrants to Quebec. This reality has led to certain debates, such as the one surrounding laicity, a particular tone as the dominant group defines and redefines what constitutes a real Quebecer, and what cultural norms and memories must predominate. While originally there was a strong governmental focus on preserving the French language, over time it has become increasingly clear that immigrant groups also bring their own treasured cultures and values which they want to maintain, even if they are francophone. So, the hijab and the Muslim women in Quebec. I have some figures about the history of Muslims in Quebec, but I'm just, rather than counting off numbers, I just want to say that according to some estimates, a few hundred Muslim women were already living in Quebec in the 1960s, a few hundred. Between 2007 and 2011, the Muslim population of Quebec grew to over 200,000, including half of which were women. So, in other words, the number of Muslims in Quebec has increased 500% since 1991. However, despite this increasing population, there was very little discussion of Muslims in general, or Muslim women in particular, until late into the 1990s. And of course, it's no secret that since 9/11, that discussion has taken on a new vigor. Eventually, the increased and sometimes conspicuous presence of Muslim women forced Quebec feminists to take notice of them. Unfortunately, much of this attention has been negative. In fact, while the public discourse regarding Muslim women in general and the hijab in particular focuses on the issue of equality between the sexes, it does not take into account the question of equality among women. The letter written and signed by Jeannette Bertrand and 20 other women last week, as well as the subsequent sorties of some of these signatories, demonstrates this point very, very well. Muslim women were called des folles when asked about whether, the fact that some of them were claiming to have been taken on to donning the veil by choice. Madame Fiatreau's response was, if they don't end up in the lake, anyway, they're crazy, in reference to the Shafia case. So Quebec feminists, seeing the need to include and represent all women in Quebec, have come face to face with profound differences among women. In fact, the Quebec feminist movement and progressive Western forces in general have become increasingly confronted with an important philosophical dilemma. If they believe that the right to self-determination constitutes an essential principle for women's equality, does this right also apply to women whose act of self-definition leads to choices outside the Western secular norm? In other words, are Quebec feminists willing to live with a certain number of realities with which they are uncomfortable in order to respect the right to self-definition and determination of all women? Is it possible to transcend the limits of Quebec nationalism, which has been historically tied to the Francophone women's movement historically, to include the practices of different cultures? My last point, I titled, In Whose Name Do We Speak? The last point I want to quickly tackle is the way in which the voice of Muslim women has been systematically appropriated in the context of this debate. Increasingly, Muslim women from all walks of life have come out in favor or against this charter. They are often pitted against one another in a kind of exotic and increasingly distasteful laïcité reality show. However, never are Arab and Muslim women who come out in favor of the charter accused of not thinking for themselves. On the contrary, theirs are taken to be the voices of reason in support of this charter. When they describe their suffering at the hands of brutal foreign regimes, nobody questions the legitimacy of their claims. I'm not suggesting that we begin to do this. However, I can't help but notice that women, especially women who wear the hijab, who have come out against the charter, are not afforded the same kind of recognition. Their experiences, when they do not reflect back the official story of suffering and misery at the hands of the terrible men and their families, are dismissed as anecdotal at best and deliberately misleading and calculating in most cases. The public conversation around whose voice is most legitimate has gone quite far indeed. In some cases, Muslim women who wear hijab are openly made fun of for their appearances. If they are rather austere-looking, they confirm our bias about their miserable lives. If they look good and speak well, they are Barbie dolls, and we can't decide whether we hate them or desire them. Either way, they can't win. Ultimately, there are probably as many reasons for wearing hijab as there are women who wear it. Some do it for cultural and familiar reasons. familial reasons, because the other women in their families do it and they want to belong to the group, somewhere because they feel religiously compelled to do so. If I had to venture a guess, I would say that the religious motivation or the belief that hijab is a religious prescription for women within Islam is at the heart of most people's decision to adopt such a dress on some level or another. But it is equally important to know that this is not an opinion shared by all Muslim women, or even all religious scholars, even if most religious scholars do agree that the hijab is at the very least a strong recommendation for Muslim women. There are in fact a number of Muslim women scholars, and it's important to say this, there are a number of Muslim women scholars, some of whom adopt the feminist label and some who don't, who have been working for over 20 years now in an attempt to favor a more egalitarian reading of the religious scriptures and to overturn the patriarchal interpretations of the faith they believe to be one of justice and equality. And I might add, the discussion around hijab has been going on for 1,400 years. Finally, as a Muslim woman and feminist myself, it is my strongest wish that we begin to change the terms of this debate. At the very least, Muslim women, including those who wear hijab, need to be recognized and respected as the authorities of their own lives. Thank you.